Whenever somebody comes to me, I make sure that I listen and I make sure that I validate them, because somebody who has been harmed, that is the number one thing that they need, is to feel safe, to feel loved, and to feel validated.
Has your life, your dreams been interrupted? Good news. It is possible to reinvent our lives. People are doing it every day, and some are brave enough to share the struggles, disappointments, and challenges. If you are looking for a new beginning, a do-over, or to rediscover your passion, maybe even find a new one, then grab a cup of coffee and let's talk. Interrupted, Act 2, Reinventing Your Legacy, with your host, Coach Lori.
Welcome, Paula. I am so glad to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
What stood out to me and why I was so excited to have you is I recognize not only had you been through trauma, but you really have a gift in how you speak to people with trauma. And your book is called?
It's Cross Addicted, Breaking Free from Family Trauma and Addiction.
You're an author, and I found you actually on the Bible app, YouVersion, and I just loved listening to your devotion. Tell us about your life, what you're doing.
I always say I'm a trauma survivor, author, and a speaker, and my passion is to help others learn to break the cycle of generational trauma and addiction, because that's where I was trapped for a long time. I'm happily married, took a lot of healing to get here, and I have 4 kids and 2 grandchildren. So I'm speaking right now, and new doors have opened for me to go inside prisons and help the incarcerated with unhealed trauma. And I'm also writing a workbook right now to help others to break that cycle. It's going to be practical tools to help others break the generational trauma and addictions.
What is it you love about going into jail or prison?
The first time that I went, there was a lot of the unknown, but what I learned is these women are sitting here with stories that are very similar to mine. Broken homes, no fathers, teen pregnancy, introduced to the gang life because they were searching for family. There was just so much, and my mouth just kind of dropped like, wow. What I realized is all these women and men had trauma, and nobody ever told them what trauma was or how to heal from it. And it just broke my heart.
That you got the vision of how you could help them.
Oh, for sure. And you know what, too, is the first time I went into a prison and then I spoke, it opened my eyes. But then when I went back to my hotel room, I was just kind of laying in my bed and I was like, okay, it all makes sense now. When I was a kid, I was always going to the prison to visit my dad. My father passed away as an alcoholic and a drug addict. But one of the things that my father had was unhealed trauma, and he couldn't stay out of trouble and he couldn't stay out of the streets. And that pattern from his life was like a ripple effect into all of our lives because of his unhealed trauma. And when I started to realize, like, wow, there's something wrong with me and I better get help, I realized it was a lot of learned behaviors and just dysfunction in the family. There was just so much. Lori, the reason I choose to share my story and the reason I speak is to let people know that cycle can be broken. It takes work, but it can be broken.
When you go into the prisons, this is on your own. So you are raising funds and support for this, right? How can people help you out?
One of the things with prisons is there's no funding to help them with like therapy or mental health issues. And it's really sad. There's nothing out there. So right now I'm raising funds to go into 12 prisons across the United States. I'm already booked all the way until November. One of them is actually a death row prison, but you can go to my website, paulajauch.com, and that's Jauch, paulajauch.com. And there's a donate tab.
Tell us your story and how you got to where you are today, how now you've turned all this around to help healing other people.
When we grow up in broken homes, I feel as kids, it's really hard to describe like, hey, I'm hurting or my parents aren't treating me right. It's like all of a sudden we become adults, Lori, and then we're like, wow, I'm having broken relationship. I'm divorced or I'm struggling with my own eating disorder or my own addiction. But there was always just this something hanging over my head, like there's something wrong with you. A lot of people who suffer from trauma can relate to that. I grew up in Indiana, which was a small town. About the age 7 years old, my father, he burned our house down because of his mental illness. After that, we're going to move to Las Vegas. It was like the middle of my 3rd grade year, and it was like a huge culture shock for us. And so we moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, and his addiction got worse. And there was 6 of us kids. I was second to the youngest. When we moved there, my mom discovered gambling. So her way of escape was, I'll just gamble and not come home. And so it was like days and weeks that she wouldn't come home. It was a confusing time, and it was really sad, just all these kids trying to raise one another. But as I got older, like in 6th grade, I remember somebody bringing alcohol, and I was in the bathroom and somebody offered me alcohol, like a kid snuck it in. And I remember drinking that alcohol and feeling a little bit of buzz, but it gave me this sensation at 12 years old. Wow. Like I can conquer the world. And then when I got into 7th grade, I met this young boy who started giving me attention. And one of the things is, you grow up in a broken home with no father. And my father was absent a lot because of his addiction. And this boy just started giving me attention, and I started hanging out with him. But in Las Vegas, we're now in a big city, and there's a lot of gang violence there. And this young boy who I met, he happened to be into a gang. With my dad eventually going to prison and my mom with her addiction, I just started hanging around this crowd trying to be accepted. And I ended up getting pregnant at a really young age, at 15 years old. And by the time I was 18, I had 2 kids, but full-blown lost into this gang life and this addiction with this guy. And I ended up staying with this gang member from the age 13 years old to 27 years old for 14 years. And by the time I was 21, Lori, I had 3 kids. But I remember, now I have kids and I need a place to live and I need somewhere to go. So I was trying to find jobs. And I remember walking into an interview, and the lady was interviewing me looking at my app, and she was like, ma'am, do you have trouble with spelling and writing? And I didn't know how to respond at the time. And I just walked out of that room again, like there's something wrong with me. Now, fast forward later, with all my education and trauma, I understand that there's something called disassociation. Disassociation is where we kind of just shut down our emotions. We shut down our brains. It's how we survive. And with my childhood trauma, being 2 days old, there was so much trauma, sexual abuse, neglect. There were so many different things that were happening as my little body and my little brain was starting to shut down. And so as I went through my school years and being a teenage mom, I couldn't learn. I couldn't comprehend any information. Here I was having 3 kids at a very young age, and I just couldn't even write or spell. So that was the first time in my life that I started questioning, I think there's something wrong with me, and I don't know what it is. My relationship with that gang member was getting really bad with the addiction and with the abuse. Somebody had recommended to me a 12-step recovery program. By this time, I was like 24 years old, and I told myself that I will go check it out. I remember walking into that room and saying, I just don't want to live anymore. And there was an older lady. This was new to me, but she took her hand and she smacked it really hard down on the table. And she goes, don't you ever say that again. Like, your life is a gift and your life has purpose. She just really spoke into me. And when I was walking out of that room, which I wanted to run out, this lady ran after me. And she handed me her business card. And that woman today, I call her my spiritual mom, but I'm 47. So 23 years later, that woman has been like a mom and what we call in our 12-step program, like a sponsor. In this 12-step program, you find somebody to work with that can kind of help you work through your past trauma and understand your story. And a lot of people don't connect with people right away. And for some reason, I believe God has given me this gift to connect with this woman for 23 years. It's an amazing story.
I love that. So you found AA, or 12-step program.
Yes. Al-Anon is what it's called.
How did life move forward after that?
There's this little saying that is, we become as sick as our secrets. When we grow up in abuse and trauma and addiction and sexual abuse, there's so much secrets and there's so much shame. We don't want to talk about what happened to us. And a lot of times we suppress those memories of what has happened to us. That's the tricky thing about childhood trauma or any kind of trauma. Sometimes we don't even remember it. There's just this lingering feeling, like I've expressed before, like there's something wrong with me. It took a lot of seat time sitting in that room. But the beauty of a 12-step recovery program is you start to hear other people's recovery, sharing hope or sharing their healing. And what it does is it's kind of like layers of an onion. We've all heard this. You kind of just peel back the layers slowly. Or another thing is, like, if you feel like you're somebody that has all these noodles in your head and you just feel like, I don't even know what's wrong with me, It's kind of like taking the noodles and untwisting them one at a time. Lori, I see this all the time, and this is the sad part with people in their healing journey is recovery, is that they run. That first meeting didn't work. That first therapy appointment didn't work. Nothing's going to work for me. Woe is me. But it's like, did you give it time? Did you fight for your healing? That's one of the things I really like to share in my message is like, you are so worth the healing and it's worth fighting for.
That is the one thing when I was binge listening to the Bible app was so many people want to say, this was my life. I got help, and they want to wrap it up with a nice big red bow, like everything's okay. And then those of us who have been going through the process, healing for many, many years, it's easy for us to then go, what's wrong with me? I didn't get that instant healing.
A lot of people who's lived long enough, let's say they're 15, let's say they're 20, 25, or 30. Think about the things that you may have been through or the things that you may have endured. You're not just going to heal from that one event and snap out of it. Trauma is such a tricky thing where it gets stored as pockets and parts of the body until we're actually ready to deal with it. And not even that, is that it sends these signals and these lies to us, like that there's something wrong with us. It affects people's self-worth and their self-esteem. There's so many different aspects that like we have to walk through. So I'll use, for example, my story. There were so many events that happened and my brain and my body still don't even remember them. I believe that I was given enough memory to heal what I need to be healed from. But even today, Lori, 20 something years into my recovery, I still have to wake up and say, Paula, you are okay. You are enough. And the reason being is because all these people who abused me because of their unhealed trauma or their dysfunction, they sent this signal to me like there's something wrong with you. You're not good enough. And what we do is when we've been through abuse or we've been through neglect or our parents have rejected and abandoned us, we take that in internally like there's something wrong with us. There's this book on trauma that the body keeps a score, and pretty much what it's saying is that your body will eternally remember what has happened to you. It breaks my heart just to see people that walk around addiction, self-sabotage, when in reality, what it does is take that sitting still, sitting with the therapist, processing, this is what happened, this is what I remember, and this is how it made me feel. But then let's talk about, Lori, when we get a trigger from that past event, we got to still work through that. It could be a smell. It could be something somebody said. It could be a flashback. This is my story. Maybe one day it will change. I still have to work on my triggers. I still have to work on my thought process. I would like to hop on here to, oh my gosh, I am so healed and I am so perfect. No, I have to get up every day and say, what is my self-care to take care of me? Especially in the faith community, we have to be very careful to say, you know what, you just need to pray and give it to God and get over it. That is the worst thing that you can say to a trauma survivor, because you can't just get over something so traumatic that has happened to you. That doesn't mean that we walk around, woe is me, and self-pity. It just means that, you know what, I got some stuff to work through and I'm willing to do the work.
I am so glad you are willing to talk about this, because for me, back in the day when I began to recognize my abuse, and often when abuse happens to you, you said as a baby, there's no language, there's no way to even process that. Thing that was hard for me is I never felt like I fit in, because if a glimpse of that would get out, like my big secrets, people couldn't handle it. So as a result, their reaction would make me then feel like something was wrong with me. So I learned, in order to be in my church, I'm not saying church is bad, because churches come a long way, but they have a lot to learn, is I had to keep the secrets. And when I finally got to a place where I was getting counseling and I began to understand, still wasn't safe in church to share my story. I was able to recognize when I spoke with other people and they would say, this happened to me or whatever, I never said, oh, you have to pray about it. I was able to say, I can hear your story. Let them talk, let them share, and never make it about who they were, but it was always what happened to them. But uninformed people don't know how to do this. And so I love what you're doing, because you're helping educate the church, and even through that Bible app, of how we can love and accept people rather than the very place you want to go for healing and help, they shush you and they tell you to pray about it and get over it and forgive. I believe I forgave early on. That wasn't my issue, but I had trauma and I didn't know how to process it. In fact, I thought it was normal.
Yeah. And it's fine to forgive, but everybody doesn't have a reconciliation story. Everybody doesn't get to invite the person who harmed them back into their lives. That's another thing. As I've seen movies or I've heard stories that parents abused or they neglected, and there was this beautiful reconciliation story. And you know what? I've had to come to acceptance that that wasn't part of my story. My parents are deceased. I believe that they died at a very young age. And part of my process was grieving the parents that I never had, and then grieving the parents that are now actually gone, that I will never have. That was part of my story. And one of the things is abandonment and rejection is so deep. It goes so deep in the gut, and it's so scary to feel. But you know what I've learned in my healing and my process is it's not going to kill me to feel those feelings, even though it feels like it will. But what will kill me is the things that I was doing, the self-harm, cutting, my eating disorder, binging and purging, and drugs and alcohol, because those were symptoms of the deeper rooted issues. There were so many things in my life from my trauma story that I had to work on. One, being disassociated, not being able to comprehend information. That made me as an adult woman illiterate, trying to learn how to read. Even when I started my early recovery, it was, you're either going to struggle with reading the rest of your life, or you're going to go get these tools that are going to help you read. And you know what? 20 years later, it helped me write a book. And I use that only as an example or an illustration to say, no matter what your situation is and no matter what your circumstances are, you can heal. Because I could have taken my story and be like, well, I don't really have any family. I don't have any parents, or my children don't have any grandparents now because both sides, they're deceased. But instead, I'm like, this is my life and this is my journey. How am I going to make the best of it? It all boils down to learning to have compassion and love for myself and the little girl of what she's been through, and to start being really gentle on myself. And that's kind of where I'm at in my journey now. And it's a whole different level, because when you go through trauma, you just want to be so hard on yourself. Do more, be more. It's never good enough. Go, go, go. This year, when January 1 hit, Lori, I just took a deep breath, and it's like, I am okay. I am enough. I'll do some work and I'm going to help people, but I'm done with the pushing. I'm done with the striving. I'm going to trust in my faith, my God, that I'm going to be okay and that I'm not going to miss out on life journey. Now that I have worked through my story and worked through my trauma, I understand that this is a part of my story, but it no longer has to define me. I do believe I'm a trauma survivor because I've overcome trauma. I've worked through trauma. So that makes me a trauma survivor. So now I can take that story and give back to other people so that they have these resources and tools and steps. Going back to your question in the beginning about knowing who to share your story with, you got to make sure it is somebody safe. Because when you've been abused, even as a child, or you grow up in addiction, or you grow up in dysfunction, there is a message that we hear growing up in that environment. That is, don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. In other words, shut down. Nobody wants to hear you. We become as sick as our secrets. And what I mean by that is we don't talk about what happened to us, and whatever we take to the grave with us, it's going to make us sick. It's going to eat us alive. The way that we heal from trauma, Lori, is we put a voice to, this is what happened to me. This is who hurt me. And this is how I feel. And this is how they made me feel. But then sometimes we have to get angry before we can grieve and before we can forgive. The forgiveness piece is very important. We don't forgive them for them. We forgive them for us. But sometimes, let's talk about it. You do got to grieve and get angry before you can forgive.
I've heard of people who have survived rape and they forgave right away and they never did the work. And you know, the statistic is how long it takes someone to share their childhood abuse is 26 years.
Yeah.
We keep that secret. And then when we tell, if we tell someone that's not safe and we get the reaction, we're liable to just go inside again. If somebody finds a counselor and they don't connect, I love what you said. Give it a chance, because one time isn't going to do it. And when you think about trauma, fight or flight. And the first thing you said, you wanted to run out of that room. And I know for me to sit with it, to lean into it, has taken a process. And like you, when I wake up in the morning, I have to instantly get with my self-talk program. I do daily self-growth, even though I'm years into recovery, because those voices in our head are very strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I was 14, I was at a seminar and they said, if you don't forgive the person who has hurt you, you will become just like them.
When you hear that message when you're 14 years old, all of a sudden you're thinking, oh my gosh, I better forgive or else I'm going to be just like them. Like, that's powerful. And then you hold on to that for 20 years and you never work through the feelings of how it actually made you feel.
Wow.
And then you think there's something wrong with you. Like, oh my gosh, 10 years later, it's coming up again that I'm feeling disgusted for what they did to me. But no, I have to forgive. I need to shut it off. There's something wrong with me and I need to shut it down. People that I've worked with were even men and women, sometimes 40s, sometimes 50s, 60s, 70s. Sometimes people have to wait until their parents are deceased because they're so scared to even talk about it. Whenever somebody comes to me, I make sure that I listen and I make sure that I validate them, because somebody who has been harmed, that is the number one thing that they need, is to feel safe, to feel love, and to feel validated. I think that's just so important to talk about.
That's a gift we can give people. If maybe we don't have the trauma, but somebody comes to us and says, this happened to me, is what you said, is to validate them, to say, I believe you.
Yeah.
If we are someone who maybe can't handle somebody's difficult story, we can say, I believe you. Let me help you find some help. When we look at the statistics of childhood abuse, it's about 40%. But when you think, especially men don't report, it's way higher than that. And I'm sure you've heard of ACEs. If you haven't heard of ACEs, if you're a teacher, if you're a trainer, if you're a leader, go look at it, because in your audience, you are going to have people with trauma. So it's a way for us to be better leaders, even if we don't have the experience, that we can create a safe place for people.
I love how you said that, how we can become better leaders, because it's so important. When I started having these symptoms or side effects, and what I mean by that is 3 kids by the age 21. I was illiterate. I had an eating disorder, and I was struggling with cutting and addiction. And then I started to question, what is wrong with me? It was not until I was 35 years old that I came across ACEs. Had no idea what that was. And ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And so pretty much what it is if you've experienced childhood trauma, you can go look at these 10 questions and ask yourself, have you been affected by these ACEs? And it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, divorce, drug addiction or alcoholism in the family, violence against your mother, mental illness, depression, suicide, person trying to commit suicide in the home, or having a relative who's been sent to jail. There was physical abuse against us with our father. I experienced a lot of sexual abuse. There was emotional, physical abuse. My parents divorced. My dad was a alcoholic and drug addict, very violent against my mother. And my father had mental illness and he went to prison. So when I saw that, Lori, it was like I got a 10 out of 10. But I could add things on there that weren't even on there. One of the things that says if you've been affected by 4 or more of these, it increases that you can have your own alcohol and drug problem, or depression, or leading a sedentary lifestyle that leads to obesity, employment difficulties, health issues, being at higher risk, and attempting suicide. When I saw that, I just started digging and doing a little bit more research. And that's when I learned about disassociation and why I had trouble reading. And that was the moment I was like, I'm not stupid. I have childhood trauma. My life has been affected. And the cool thing about my very first book that was released, Cross Addicted, Breaking Free from Family Trauma and Addiction, is I won this award, and I had to call my publisher and say, what is this? Like, what is going on? Who are these people? Why are they reaching out to me? And she's like, honey, that's a big deal. And my book won this award. It was called the Golden Scroll Award. So then, not even a year later, it happened again. And I'm like, what is this? And they're like, it's the Advanced Writers. My book won another award. I believe that was my little gift of working through my trauma, teaching myself how to read, how to pronounce words, what do they mean, writing this book, which was really hard, editing it and having people sit with me and teach me so many different things. But that right there, because we read the 10 ACEs, we read how your life can be affected. But my little book story can also show you the resilience and how we can overcome and how we can break this cycle. And I guess going back to this prison ministry, that's why I'm so passionate about it, because my dad was in and out of prison, mental hospitals, long stays in jail. He died from alcoholism. I see how it's affected my siblings. I see how it's affected my life. Even though I'm in a beautiful marriage and I'm breaking that cycle, there's still, I don't want to say the word residue, but there's still daily things that I have to work through. I have to say, okay, I recognize you're there, but you're not going to affect my life. I'm going to overcome this. I am okay today. I am in a safe place today. But because all that my body endured and all that my body experienced, those are real feelings that I have to push through. And I guess I share that to say so that other people know they're not alone. That is how trauma survivors feel.
I heard you tell the story, but then the story continues. And then when I was this age, and then when I was that age, as I walked through my turning victim to survivor, I didn't have a lot of support. I'm probably a little older than you, but now there are so many more resources until we tell the story. And I love how you said that's where the freedom comes. We want to kind of keep it safe inside of us, but then we have certain behaviors like eating disorders or weight or all these issues that can come from that. But when we begin to get the freedom, there are people, I've heard people say, I was healed instantly. God restored my life. And I've always resented them. And I hate to say this as a Christian. I hate to say, there was one day I had been on so many Zoom calls and I'd heard so many people say, like, New Year, God gave me a word. God spoke to me. God told me. I woke up one morning and this is literally what I said. God, why do you hate me? Why aren't you telling me? But what I recognized was, unfortunately, people speak badly. They say things that maybe aren't exactly true, or they say it in a way that when you do this, you will get that. I find myself saying, what is wrong with me? And then that's where I have to daily do the work.
And you touched on so many beautiful things. Trauma is such a tricky thing, from the disassociation. And you also touched on weight. And a lot of men and women struggle with their weight if they have had sexual abuse. And then they're like, well, what is wrong with me? And why can't I get this weight off of? It's another thing where you go back to that book where trauma keeps the score. And I believe that's why I had this eating disorder for so long. You have to just get back to this place and say, you know what? This is my story and I'm going to be really kind to you and I'm going to love you and I'm going to accept myself no matter what. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to do the best I can. But we have to come to this place of peace and acceptance of who we are, what our story is, and what has happened to us.
Do you have brain fog? Are you exhausted all the time? Do you struggle with depression? How about cravings? Imagine an enzyme that turns sugar into fiber. For a link to order your bottle, email me at lacoach@comcast.net. That's LACOACH at Comcast.net. 3 things we learned from Paula. One is the importance of understanding ACEs. If maybe you've had abuse and you don't know it, and that's why things aren't working out for you, you can at least recognize it. Go to the webpage aces.org and get some support and help. We can and do recover. For many of us, it is a daily routine of prayer, self-talk, and reading your Bible, reading something spiritual and motivational. And if weight loss is an issue for you, it might be tied to childhood abuse. And the good news is there is help for that too.
If you love this podcast, here's a big ask. Will you share with your friends and family, subscribe, give us a review, and a 5-star rating so that others looking to reinvent their lives will be able to get the help they're looking for? Thank you in advance.